Vamos a continuar con la agenda de FIAD y le vamos a dar la bienvenida a Su. Ella es una notable aventurera, coach, autora y speaker de conferencias TEDx. Va a compartir con nosotros Liderazgo para entornos de incertidumbre y cambiantes. Es una conferencista presentada por Tecnológico de Monterrey y Open LMS, dos de los sponsors oro de esta edición. La conferencia será en inglés con traducción simultánea. Recuerden que también en esta oportunidad pueden seleccionar el idioma que prefieren apretando el mundito que aparece en la parte inferior del menú. Bienvenida, Sue FIAD. Welcome.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Let me just share my slides now and we can get going. Buenos dias, and I hope you're enjoying the sessions so far today. Today I'm going to take you into a different environment, an environment that many of you are probably unfamiliar with, which is the whole point of the session today. How can we lead ourselves and people that we are with into uncertain, unfamiliar, and rapidly changing environments? Now, to give you a sense of the environment that I'm going to be sharing with you today, I'm going to show you a little video clip. This environment is temperatures that are cold enough to freeze your flesh in seconds. And it's in this short clip, I'd like you to think about your own environment and what it feels like to you when you are in a relentless change, uncertain, unfamiliar space. So have a think as I share this with you. Now that was only a few moments, and that noise you heard was the wind blowing in Greenland. And I'm going to be taking you on our adventure skiing across the Greenland ice cap today. And that was us heading into the unknown on our expedition. Think about the unknown that you are taking your teams, your stakeholders, and yourself into. For you, does it seem appealing, somewhere you want to go? Or does it seem threatening and you'd far rather stay with the known? Well, one of the things that's worth thinking about is our relationship with the unknown. And how do you think about it? Is it appealing to you, or is it a frightening place to visit? Well, I will explain about how we faced the unknown on our expedition, going into extreme temperatures of cold, on our expedition to ski across the Greenland ice cap. Now, this journey is about 540 kilometers. So that's about half the distance, for example, from Buenos Aires to Santiago. But like this map shows you, it looks as if it's one level. Our expedition was 2/3 of the way uphill and 1/3 downhill. But between those dots that you see on the map, which are points of certainty, there's a lot of unknown, just like you might have on your journey that you're taking. Where are the points of certainty and familiarity? And where are those areas that you know undoubtedly will take you into unfamiliar territory, or take those around you that you're leading and inspiring into unfamiliar territory too? Well, 4 of us on our team had to go through that unfamiliar journey together here. And what we did was we used 3 things that really helped us effectively. One is to come at the unknown with curiosity. The second is to recognize that we have an ability to adapt. And in the moment when things are uncertain, how can we bring a new perspective, a different perspective to the same challenge? And then thirdly, a willingness to feel uncomfortable. Now you might think, well, that's obvious, Sue. Don't we all just have a willingness to feel uncomfortable? Well, Well, maybe there's a point that I'm not stating here on the slide, and that is about being willing to act despite feeling uncomfortable. And I've certainly seen in organizations in my 25 or so decades in the learning and development space that often people don't take decisions because they feel uncomfortable. And that is a decision in its own right, to choose to do nothing. And sometimes that can bring unexpected consequences, as you will see on our journey. So as I take you into this next few minutes to talk about our journey, I hope I will illustrate how these points played out on our journey, and you can reflect on how they might show up for you and what you could do to bring more curiosity and an ability to adapt and a willingness to feel uncomfortable as you face the unknown. Our journey began on the west coast, and this is the start point, Russell Glacier near Kangerslusuaq. Now, we had agreed as a team of 4 of us to sign up to 2 ways of working. First of all, we agreed that safety was going to be more important than getting there. So any decision would always put safety as our number 1 priority. And the second thing that we agreed was to start and finish as friends. Now, imagine if you put that into the way that you work with your teams, how that might influence the way people behave towards one another. But what we did do at this point was actually state those things and agree them together. One of the things that can make people feel uncertain, even in a team meeting, is if they don't know what the rules of the game are. They don't know whether they should speak, whether they shouldn't speak. So a very simple thing I always recommend is at the start of any conversation or group interaction is to not only say what you're there to achieve, but to say how you want to work together. And it might only take a few moments, but it minimizes that uncertainty. As we started off, we knew we were going to face not only crevasses and glaciers like you can see behind, we were going to also face dry land. So we had adapted ahead of time. We brought rucksacks with us as well as our sledges. And we managed to then get all our equipment using these 2 different modes of transport on towards the ice cap. But no more than 6 hours after starting our expedition, we were planning to ski across this lake. But the temperatures were unseasonably warm, and it meant that the ice around the edge had melted and we couldn't cross. Now we had to do a detour. We had to adapt. And before we know where we are, the shaft on one of those sledges that we were dragging had broken. How motivated do you think we are now? A critical piece of equipment broken, and we've not even been going for 1 day. Well, that's where I think it's important to recognize and to draw on the strengths of your team when you're leading into the unknown, which means, first of all, you need to know what the strengths of your team are. You need to help your people know that you recognize what their strengths are. And then in those moments of uncertainty and unfamiliarity, you can sometimes draw upon those strengths, or you as an individual leader can draw upon your own strengths, because that gives you a degree of certainty and confidence. So our team member who had a strength in DIY and problem solving, he was able to fix the sledge and we were able to continue on. A little later, a couple of days later, we're now onto the ice cap proper, but there's this crevasse zone at the edge. Now, as you can see in this image, it might look quite innocuous, but there could be chasms hundreds of feet deep that as you ski across, you could fall into. So how do you take a team into that high-risk crevasse zone environment? Think about what the crevasse zones are in your organizations, where one thing that could go wrong could spell disaster. Maybe a data breach. It could be a health and safety question, or even a key member leaving the team. And how do you minimize the risk in those areas? Well, because safety was important to us, we agreed together to be roped up, one big rope going from the first person through their sledge to the second person and so on. That meant we were skiing like a giant snake. We all had to be watching out for one another and ensuring that we kept that rope taut. So that meant if somebody fell into a crevasse, they could be pulled out by the rope and they would be fairly safe. Now that's all okay in theory. We even had a procedure that we had written down and we had laminated and put in our pockets so that we could draw upon it when necessary. But I wouldn't like just to rely on a written procedure to think about my life, keeping myself safe. So we needed to bring out other ways of training up inexperienced people in the team. So one of the people who hadn't been through the crevasse zone before said she would like to go first and lead. And that's what happened. Until for 15 minutes, she was skiing along, and from behind was the experienced person shouting at her, "Go left, no, go right, no, over there." Now that might sound like you're in a car with a backseat driver. Well, that's what it was like for her too. She didn't learn there, she just got frustrated, threw her ski poles down and said, "You tell me what to do, go back in front." The leader at that point said, "Oh, I realise now, I can't just tell you, instruct you, I need to coach you." So he identified some of the important things that he looks out for. He then shared them, and he said, "Next time you are heading forwards and I feel nervous, I'll shout stop, but I'll ask you a question. I'll not just tell you what to do." So introducing asking questions, being curious, is a way of helping to manage and take a whole team through an unfamiliar environment, which shows that you're all in it together and you can draw upon that experience and knowledge in quite a different way. Then after the crevasse zone, and we all survived, nobody fell in a crevasse, we were now free to ski at any speed we liked. Well, everybody began to ski according to their own pace, and the gaps began to get bigger and bigger between each of the four of us. Now that was beginning to build a degree of frustration. And at the end of the day, this frustration, well, nothing happened to it. We got inside the tent and nobody said anything. And I bet you've been like that in a situation where you know there's unknown things and people aren't talking, but you need to create an environment where there's a degree of psychological safety and trust so that people will get those difficult conversations out in the open. Well, next day, what happened was one of the members of the team gets a muscle strain in his leg, and that caused the whole team to stop. And it meant then we did have to sit down and talk about what to do, how to solve our problem. Well, of course, first of all, people were quite angry. Why are you going so slow? Why are you going so fast? And all of this emotion came out. And yet it's about how do you feel uncomfortable and sit through that? Because once people have expressed an emotion and been able to calm down, then they will be able to use the part of the brain that will help with problem solving. And we came up with a way to find a much more compromising speed. In actual fact, that fastest person, who was the one with the muscle strain, said, "Look, give me some of the weight from you, the person who's slowest. Give me some of the weight from your sledge. That will free you up to ski faster and it will slow me down and we'll find a more even speed for everybody." Well, I'll say I was that slow one at the back. And I found it difficult at first to admit I had a weakness until I reframed my thinking and said, "Do you know, I'm helping the entire team to succeed. I'm going to be uncomfortable here, but I'll also know that I've got a strength in other areas." And together we found a way to move forward as a team, bringing that curiosity to the situation rather than judgment of one another. Now, you all will have KPIs or goals, whatever you want to call it, key things that you're measured by, as we did. Our measure on our expedition was how far are we traveling every day. And after 22 days of skiing, after 11 days of skiing, we measured we were traveling 22 kilometers every day. And if we carried on at that speed, we would run out of food before we reached the other coastline. And yet we were physically and mentally exhausted going at that speed. So it means you've got to go even more into your unknown. How do you do that? Well, it really means a reframe of your thinking. And what we did is, rather than go at 22 kilometers per day, we said, rather than think about hours per day, which is what we've been doing before, we began to think about the situation in a different way. And we said, we know we can ski 8 intervals of 1 hour at a time. We'll make those intervals 1 hour and a quarter. So effectively we'll ski for 10 hours, but we'll only think about it in intervals, 8 intervals, and we know we can do that. So that is how we reframed our mind to get into that unknown, because you have to look for a new way to really push yourself. And if we keep on with the existing focus, sometimes it can feel really impossible. So I encourage you to take on these 3 points I've mentioned. Curiosity, rather than make quick judgments in situations, how can we be open to curiosity and think about what's possible? Secondly, have you got the ability to adapt? Maybe think about the yes and question rather than the yes but question. And finally, even although things feel difficult and uncomfortable, believe to yourself that it's worthwhile pushing through. That's what we did, and after 28 days, we were successful in reaching the east coast of the Greenland ice cap. So in times of uncertainty, here are just 4 practical things, again, I would recommend. One is to really be clear about your purpose. Although our dots on our map were certain, we always knew about our purpose as well, why we were doing our expedition. And despite the uncertainty, we always would come back to the why. Be willing to ask questions of yourself and of others. Don't avoid those difficult conversations because they always are worthwhile having, and they always are never quite as difficult as we imagine them to be. And finally, recognize your strength because that gives you a firm foundation to work on, not only for yourself, but for your team around you as well. So in those short minutes that I've taken you on our journey, well, you might want to read more about some of my adventures. I've been on many polar expeditions and to other extreme environments. So I'd love to get your perspective on what I've been talking about today. Please do connect via this QR code. That will take you to my LinkedIn profile. And I'll give away 30 copies of my audio book, the audio version of my book, Explore a Life of Adventure. So if you'd like to be inspired a little bit yourself to listen to that, then please do get in touch via this QR code, and I'd love to hear from you then. So thank you for listening this afternoon, and I'll hand back to our organizers.
Thank you very much, Sue, for showing us your experience. Thank you. Gracias por estar aquí en FIAD. Nosotros hemos completado la primera parte de esta jornada con 5 speakers internacionales de alto nivel.